The break room smelled of burnt coffee and quiet desperation, a fitting backdrop for the morning my new CEO walked in, announcing she was building a leaner, more agile compliance team. I was Marcus Webb, 53, and I'd heard enough corporate jargon in my career to know that leaner and more agile was just a polished way of saying smaller specifically. Fewer people who knew what they were doing, including me. She had arrived at Solvara Pharmaceuticals 8 months earlier. Her resume looked impressive until you read it closely. 2 years running a health tech startup in Austin selling wellness apps to corporate HR, then brand strategy consulting for consumer goods, and an MBA from Vanderbilt. She was 38, spoke entirely in frameworks, and had been hired to modernize the operational culture of a company that had spent 26 years manufacturing and distributing regulated medications across 14 states. I'd been at Solvara for 19 years. I had built our entire FDA regulatory compliance infrastructure from scratch after we nearly lost our manufacturing license in 2008. Following an inspection that found 3 critical deviations in our quality control documents, I spent the better part of a year living out of hotel rooms near our Raleigh facility, working 18-hour days with federal inspectors until every process was documented, validated, and defensible. After that, I expanded our compliance program to cover 2 additional manufacturing sites, guided us through 4 FDA pre-approval inspections for new drug applications, and personally managed the agency relationship during a voluntary recall in 2019, averting a potential catastrophe because I had established enough credibility with our district office to handle it cooperatively, rather than as a regulatory enforcement action. None of that history appeared on a PowerPoint slide, and my new CEO communicated almost exclusively through PowerPoint slides. The warning signs emerged in her second month. She began scheduling what she called strategic alignment sessions for operations and quality teams without including me. I discovered the first one from our Raleigh plant manager, who called asking if I would join the afternoon call. I hadn't been informed it existed. When I mentioned it to her, she smiled in that particular way people do when a decision is already made and they're managing your reaction. She explained that the sessions were about operational efficiency exploration and that regulatory affairs would be looped in once the framework took shape. I'd been working in pharmaceutical compliance long enough to know you never shape a framework and then invite regulatory in. Every operational decision in drug manufacturing carries a compliance dimension. Retrofitting compliance onto decisions already made is how companies end up in consent decrees. I said so, professionally and without alarm. She nodded as if waiting for me to stop talking. The pattern repeated over the following weeks. I was removed from the distribution list for our quarterly FDA correspondence review. My name disappeared from the project team preparing a new drug application we'd been working on for 18 months. When I asked, I was told the application team was streamlining internal communication pathways. My deputy director, who I had hired and trained, began receiving direct calendar invites to meetings I was excluded from. Then her brother-in-law arrived. Connor, 31 years old, master's in public health from a little-known school in Colorado, 3 years in healthcare consulting, serving hospital systems, a completely different regulatory environment from pharmaceutical manufacturing. He had never worked with FDA, never managed a 21 CFR Part 211 compliance program, never faced an FDA investigator during a facility inspection while answering batch record discrepancies with calm precision. He was introduced as our new Vice President of Compliance and Quality Assurance. Fresh perspective and cross-industry insight, she said, for a function she described as siloed. Connor's remarks were almost entirely corporate phrasing. Patient-centric quality culture, compliance as competitive advantage, reimagining relationships with regulatory partners. The FDA is not a partner. It is a federal agency with statutory authority to shut down manufacturing, seize product, and refer executives for criminal prosecution. Relationships matter, but they do not imply equivalence. I kept my expression neutral. That afternoon, I went to see Richard, our general counsel. He'd been with the company 11 years and read contracts the way I read inspection reports, looking for what would matter in a crisis. I told him I needed to review our FDA establishment registration and the consent agreement terms from 2009. Without asking why, he pulled the files. He recognized reconnaissance when he saw it. The 2009 consent agreement followed our near-miss inspection. Technically expired, it had set precedent in our FDA relationship. Solvara had committed to maintaining key personnel in quality and compliance and notifying the agency of significant organizational changes affecting those functions. That notification provision hadn't been formally renewed, but it was referenced in our last pre-approval inspection commitment letter from 2021, still active. Our Drug Master File's technical dossiers supporting product approvals listed me by name as the responsible regulatory official. Changes to designated officials required formal amendments and agency acknowledgement before becoming effective. My name was embedded in the regulatory architecture of our approvals in ways that could not simply be reorganized. I didn't go into detail with Richard. I asked him to pull all commitment letters and DMF designations back to 2008. He did, looking at me with a long pause. "Is there something I should know about?" he asked. "I'm doing strategic planning," I said. "Succession documentation. Overdue." He nodded, fully understanding what I was really doing. That evening, at my kitchen table in Durham, the documents spread out before me, yellow legal pad filled with notes. I considered my situation. 53, recently separated. Daughter entering her second year at Duke, mortgage in legal transition. Losing this job meant 6 to 9 months finding a comparable position in the research triangle or relocating. Senior regulatory directors with FDA relationship equity aren't common, and neither are jobs like this. The pressure was real. I wasn't planning to lose the job. I planned to leave on my own terms, in a way that made the cost visible to everyone who needed to see it. For the next 3 weeks, I documented everything accurately, completely. Every FDA correspondence, inspection readiness protocol, contact relationship, drug master file amendment procedure, commitment letter, deviation reporting timeline, 840 pages of regulatory infrastructure, mostly in my head or in filing systems I designed. I organized it onto encrypted drives at home. I was building 2 things: a complete transition package for whoever would need it, and a clear picture of what it would look like when that person wasn't me. The crisis arrived sooner than expected. In early November, FDA notified us of a scheduled pre-approval inspection for our new oncology drug application. The inspection was set for January 14th. Pre-approval inspections are the moment of truth for new drug applications. Federal investigators arrive and spend 3 to 5 days examining everything: manufacturing processes, laboratory controls, quality systems, documentation practices, and the accuracy of every claim in the application. Significant deficiencies delay or deny approval. For our oncology application, the potential market was estimated by our CFO at $300 million in first-year revenue. I had been the primary regulatory contact for 2 years. The morning after the FDA notification, my new CEO called a meeting. Connor was already at the table, along with our VP of manufacturing and the head of clinical operations. A consultant I didn't recognize was sitting near the window with a laptop open, unusual for our meetings. I had asked the team to begin inspection preparation. My CEO said Connor would lead readiness. "Marcus, we'll need you to transition your FDA relationship contacts to Connor's team and ensure documentation handoff by December 1st. I looked at Connor, then back at my CEO. "This inspection is for a new drug application," I said carefully. "FDA's primary contact is the designated regulatory official of record. That's currently my name on the DMF. We're updating those designations." She said it was straightforward administrative work. "It isn't," I replied. "DMF amendments require agency acknowledgement, taking a minimum of 60 days under normal circumstances. The inspection was in 9 weeks. She glanced at the consultant typing something. "We'll expedite it," she said. I looked around. The VP of manufacturing studied his hands. The clinical director stared at the ceiling. Nobody wanted to be in this conversation. "FDA doesn't expedite DMF official changes for convenience," I said. "Acknowledgement happens when the agency has processed them. We cannot substitute an individual for the designated official of record in an active pre-approval inspection without agency acknowledgement." "Marcus," she said, patience thinning. "The company is evolving its organizational structure. Compliance must support that." "Supporting that," I said, "means not walking into a pre-approval inspection with personnel discrepancies between our filing records and actual inspection team. That triggers Form 483 observations. It signals documentation control problems to investigators evaluating our controls." The room fell silent. "Connor," she asked, "what's your read on the timeline flexibility?" He looked up, spoke of managing stakeholder expectations, phase transition protocols, and regulatory relationship management, but understood it only as a communication function, not a technical or legal one. I nodded and said nothing further. That afternoon, I called the consultant firm where my former colleague Dana worked. Dana had spent 12 years at FDA's Office of Pharmaceutical Quality before moving into private practice. She understood agency relationships as a mechanic understands an engine. In practice, not theory. I told her I might explore options and asked if her firm could accommodate a senior regulatory affairs director. They had been looking for someone with my profile for 2 years. 2 weeks later, early December, I submitted my resignation. Not to the CEO, not to HR. I sent it directly to Richard, our general counsel, the designated company officer responsible for FDA regulatory compliance obligations. The letter was standard, 2 months' notice, effective February 15th, citing professional development. Attached was a formal notification to FDA's district office, informing them that Marcus Webb, designated regulatory official for Silvara Pharmaceuticals, Drug Master Files, F2847, F2848, F3201, and F3890 would be transitioning effective February 15th. The notification outlined commitment letter obligations, DMF amendment requirements for designating a successor, and the timeline implications for the pending pre-approval inspection. Federal regulations are explicit. When a designated regulatory official changes at a company with active FDA commitments, the agency can reassess compliance posture and representations made under the departing official. Practically, our January 14th inspection became significantly more complicated. Richard called at 6:45 p.m. "Marcus," he said, voice controlled, "I've reviewed your notification." "I assumed you would," I said. "Walk me through January," I explained. Without acknowledged DMF amendments, the inspection team would see a designation discrepancy between our filings and personnel. Investigators document all discrepancies. Observations follow, leading to complete response requirements, delaying the oncology application by months while competitors move forward. "How long to transition DMF designations?" he asked. Assuming amendment requests were filed this week, 60 to 90 days for agency acknowledgement, the inspection would need rescheduling. Minimum 1/4 delay for the oncology application, I confirmed. There was another path. I could complete the inspection as designated official of record. After agency approval, which I believed would occur because the application was technically sound, we would start the proper succession process for DMF amendments. At that point, transition could happen correctly, with full agency acknowledgement on a timeline avoiding filing inconsistencies. "What would that require from the company?" he asked. "My current role and reporting authority must remain unchanged through inspection completion and the formal transition. No new title, no restructured position, my actual role." He said he'd call back. The next morning, he called, asking me to come in early. At 8 a.m., Richard and William Hartley, our chairman and founder, were in the conference room. William, 67, chemistry PhD from Georgia Tech, had built Silvara from a regional manufacturer into a proprietary product company over decades. His presence indicated how the board had received the briefing. "Marcus," William said, shaking my hand, "sit down. I owe you an apology, and probably a longer conversation." I sat. Richard briefed the board the previous night and had spoken with FDA counsel that morning. "I want to understand from you what the appropriate path forward looks like," I explained, straightforwardly. He listened, then said, "We built something here with your name embedded in its foundations, and someone tried to renovate the building without consulting the foundation." "Accurate," I said. He turned to Richard, framed as a question, not really one. "If Marcus completes January inspection in his current role, secures approval, and we do this transition properly, how long does the right process take?" 4 to 6 months, I said, assuming immediate DMF filings and a successor with proper credentials and FDA qualifications. He looked steadily. "You're willing to stay through that process?" I told him the process required it. "I'll also be proud of what I leave behind. 19 years ensuring the company's regulatory position is defensible. I want to finish properly." William exhaled slowly, taking in the magnitude of what had almost unraveled. We called a board meeting for January 3rd. William invited me to attend. 12 people in the room, top floor of Raleigh office, view of the research park and, on clear days, the Capitol building. The CEO presented slides on pipeline value, and operational efficiency ratios. Well designed. Richard then presented regulatory implications, DMF amendment requirements, commitment obligations, inspection timeline, potential oncology application delay, and estimated revenue impact of a one-quarter delay. The board asked questions for 40 minutes. The CEO answered some, but technical regulatory questions required 19 years of context. I answered those. Margaret Holloway, longest-serving independent director and former FDA commissioner, asked, "At what point in the last 8 months did the regulatory function get evaluated as a candidate for restructuring without full assessment of commitment letter obligations?" Nobody answered. The January inspection unfolded exactly as planned. I spent 3 weeks preparing a comprehensive readiness package, process documentation, deviation histories, corrective action records, laboratory data integrity assessments, everything FDA needed to evaluate our oncology applications manufacturing claims. I walked the investigators through 4 days of technical examination. On the morning of day 4, the lead investigator closed his notebook, looked at me across the table, and said the documentation package was the most well-organized pre-approval submission he had reviewed in 11 years. They left without issuing a single Form 483 observation. Our oncology application received approval 3 months later. I did not attend the internal celebration. I was at lunch across town with the partners at a regulatory consulting firm I had been quietly meeting with for the past 2 months. An offer letter had sat in my desk drawer for 6 weeks, waiting for the right moment. I submitted my final resignation the day after approval, this time to William directly. He called within an hour. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this. I explained I was not leaving out of anger, but because I had completed the job I committed to finishing, and the company was now in a position to execute the transition correctly. He said he respected that and apologized that a near catastrophe had been required to make previously invisible risks visible. I agreed and thanked him for all the company had given me over 19 years. The formal regulatory transition lasted another 5 months. DMF official amendments were filed in February. FDA acknowledged them in April. The successor candidate, an experienced director who had spent 12 years at a competing manufacturer with exactly the credentials required by the agency, began onboarding in March and was formally designated in our filings by May. I oversaw every step, ensuring every system was documented, every FDA relationship properly introduced, and every piece of institutional memory recorded in a retrievable location. By the time I walked out of the Raleigh facility for the last time in June, my new CEO had been gone for 2 months. The board had voted no confidence in her leadership at the March meeting, citing organizational decisions that created unnecessary regulatory risk and a cultural environment that drove out institutional expertise. William Hartley had taken an active role in selecting her replacement, a former COO from a mid-sized pharma manufacturer in New Jersey, someone who understood that in this industry, compliance is not a department. It is the foundation on which everything else is built. Connor returned to consulting. I do not know which firm, nor do I carry particular feelings about it. The consulting practice I joined had been trying for 2 years to hire a senior FDA regulatory director with my profile. My first assignment was advising a specialty pharma company preparing for a pre-approval inspection for a new pain management formulation. The FDA district contact had been in field operations for over a decade. We had worked together 3 times previously. When I called to introduce myself as the new lead on the account, she laughed and said she had wondered where I had gone. I told her I had taken a brief leave to let someone else learn how things worked. She said it sounded like a story worth hearing. I told her maybe someday, but right now we had an inspection to prepare for. I had already reviewed their documentation package and had questions about process validation protocols we needed to address. In every industry, there are people who spend years building systems that actually function. Processes, relationships, institutional knowledge that often seems invisible until it stops existing. Companies that mistake that invisibility for unimportance often discover the cost in the most expensive way possible, not because the builders intended it, but because the systems were designed to work honestly, whether anyone was paying attention or not. I did not feel satisfaction in seeing Solvara's oncology launch delay reported to investors as a regulatory timeline adjustment. I did not feel vindicated when the board reshuffled. I felt something quieter, the relief of someone who had spent 2 decades doing work that mattered, work that had been nearly discarded, and then ensured it was completed properly before leaving. That night, My daughter texted me about the approval because someone in the company had mentioned my name internally. She asked what it meant. I told her it meant the medicine would reach patients on schedule. That was always the purpose. She sent back a single word. Good. She was right. It was.